Filmmakers Legal Clinic presents Filming During Protests. As election season approaches, protests and demonstrations become increasingly common expressions of civic engagement and political discourse. In these dynamic settings, filmmakers play a crucial role in documenting the events unfolding around them. However, with this opportunity comes a responsibility to navigate complex legal issues. Let's examine some legal issues that you will want to know about when filming at political demonstrations and protests, including navigating the location or space in which the protest takes place, addressing privacy concerns, avoiding defamation, interacting with police, managing copyright concerns, and securing appearance releases. The first consideration when filming is the location or space in which the activity takes place. Political demonstrations and protests held in private spaces, such as privately owned buildings or venues, are generally considered private events. As a result, event organizers and property owners may have the power to enforce restrictions on filming within these private spaces. This includes, for example, protests that take place on many college campuses. Although colleges are often tolerant of many forms of protest, they still generally retain control over what happens on their campuses. To understand the extent to which filming is allowed at a political demonstration or rally in a private space, filmmakers should contact the event organizer or find the event's rules. In contrast to protests and demonstrations held on private property, events held in public spaces, such as streets, parks, or public squares, are typically considered public events, and you likely have a right to film in that space. Nonetheless, to ensure compliance with local laws and regulations regarding filming in public spaces, it's advisable to take the following steps. First, research local laws. Familiarize yourself with the laws and regulations governing filming activities in public spaces in the area where the protest or demonstration is taking place. These laws can vary significantly between jurisdictions, so it's essential to conduct thorough research. Second, check for permit requirements. Some cities or municipalities may require individuals or groups to obtain a permit for filming in public spaces, especially if the filming involves large crews or special parking needs. Check with the local government to determine if a filming permit is required for your project. Third, contact local authorities. If you're unsure about the rules and regulations regarding filming in public spaces, consider reaching out to local authorities, such as the police department or city hall. They can provide information and guidance on any permit requirements or restrictions that might apply. Finally, adhere to any safety guidelines or instructions provided by local authorities. Not only is this the right thing to do, but it will also ensure that you don't face any interference by police during the course of filming. For example, you should avoid obstructing pedestrian traffic or illegally parking your vehicle. By taking these proactive steps and ensuring compliance with local laws and regulations, you can film responsibly and ethically in public spaces while respecting the rights and safety of others. The second issue that filmmakers must consider is privacy, which can present a significant concern under certain circumstances. In the context of filmmaking, privacy refers to an individual's right to control the dissemination of information about themselves, particularly in situations where they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. To determine whether privacy can be an issue, filmmakers should ask themselves, am I invading another individual's reasonable expectation of privacy by filming them or including them in my film? The concept of a reasonable expectation of privacy is a legal term that refers to a set of circumstances under which an individual's privacy rights are not only legitimate, but also reasonable in light of an alleged infringing action by another person. The third issues that filmmakers should consider is defamation and a related concept known as false light. Defamation is a legal term that refers to the act of making false statements about an individual or entity that may harm their reputation. These false statements, known as defamatory statements, can be communicated orally, which is typically called slander, or in written or recorded form, which is typically called libel. For a statement to be considered defamatory, it must generally meet certain criteria. First, the statement must be false. In the context of defamation, a statement generally has a broad definition and refers to any communication, expression, or depiction of an event that conveys a particular assertion or claim about an individual or entity. In filmmaking specifically, this means that a filmmaker can potentially be held liable not only for the words and verbal statements that appear in the film, but also for any implied statements or depictions that the film may make about certain individuals or entities. Second, the defamatory statement must be communicated to a third party. In the context of a film, this element would typically be satisfied by the showing of the film or even clips of the film on social media. Third, the speaker of the statement must have acted with at least negligence, although the level of intent or fault required may depend on who the statement is about. If the statement is about a private individual, then mere negligence may be enough to render the speaker liable. However, if the statement is about a public figure, then the standard of intent goes up, and the speaker must have acted with actual malice. Crucially, just because someone else makes a defamatory statement in a film does not mean that the filmmaker cannot also get in trouble for republishing that statement when they show the film. Finally, the false statement must cause harm to the target individual or entity. This harm can be in the form of financial loss, but it can also be damage to one's professional reputation or even emotional distress. Much like defamation, false light is another legal concept that involves portraying someone in a misleading or false manner that would be considered highly offensive to a reasonable person. While similar to defamation, false light focuses more on the portrayal of an individual rather than the accuracy of any specific statements. In the context of filming during protests, false light claims may arise if footage is edited or presented in a way that misrepresents the actions or intentions of the individuals involved, leading to a misleading or offensive portrayal. Filmmakers should be mindful of how their editing decisions could affect the perception of individuals depicted in their footage to avoid potential false light claims. An example of how defamation and false light can arise in the context of filming live events can provide us a helpful illustration of how these factors work together. On January 18, 2019, a confrontation between groups of political demonstrators took place near the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The interaction was between a Covington Catholic high school student named Nicholas Sandman and a Native American named Nathan Phillips, and was captured in photos and videos widely disseminated by major media outlets. The incident quickly became a flashpoint in American politics and culture, which was described by the New York Times as an explosive convergence of race, religion, and ideological beliefs. Videos released days later, however, showed that initial media reports had omitted key details behind the incident, including the fact that Phillips had approached the Catholic students rather than the other way around. Many news outlets were criticized for covering the incident without fully investigating what occurred and fueling controversy and outrage. And Covington students, including Sandman, subsequently filed a number of multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuits against various news agencies. Although the students were not successful in all of their lawsuits against news agencies, they did have a strong enough argument to get past the initial hurdles of bringing a defamation case, because their claim appeared to satisfy all of the elements of a defamation claim. For example, the element of falsity was arguably satisfied because the initial media reports had omitted key details that created a distorted depiction of the incident between the Native American demonstrator and the Catholic students. Second, the element of publicity was satisfied because photos and videos were widely disseminated by major media outlets, not only in the United States, but across the world. Third, the element of fault or intent was arguably satisfied as well because news agencies could have plausibly realized that their depiction of the incident was distorted by further investigating the incident and conducting better due diligence about what actually took place. Finally, the element of harm was satisfied as well because the Catholic students at the center of the video faced harassment online in addition to suffering many reputational harms. Ultimately, most of these legal cases were either settled or lost by the Catholic students, but the incident nonetheless embroiled these news agencies in years of litigation and cost them lots of money. A similar result for an independent filmmaker could potentially bring an end to their project. For these reasons, it is highly important to carefully consider whether your film contains any false or misleading statements or depictions about any individuals that could potentially damage their reputations. Such statements or depictions could open the door to claims of defamation or false light being brought against the film and you. That said, there are defenses available against claims of defamation and false light, such as truth and fair comment. Ultimately, the responsibility for defamatory content in a film falls on the filmmaker, regardless of whether the statement was originally made by someone else, such as a protester. Republishing defamatory statements, even if they originated from another source, can still expose the filmmaker to legal liabilities. For this reason, you should be cautious and thoroughly vet content containing statements about others to mitigate the risk of legal repercussions. The fourth issue that filmmakers should consider is how to interact with police. With regard to police, it is essential to understand the extent of your rights when filming law enforcement officers, particularly during protests. While the First Amendment generally protects the right to record police activities in public spaces, in the United States, filmmakers should still understand that these First Amendment rights are not absolute and that law enforcement officers may maintain certain powers in the execution of their official duties. When filming protests, it would be prudent for filmmakers to take measures to minimize the risk of interference from police. One way to minimize the risk of interference from police is by obtaining press credentials, as this can help establish your status as a member of the press and may afford you additional protections. Additionally, clearly identifying yourself as press to law enforcement officers can help mitigate potential conflicts and distinguish your presence from that of protesters. Likewise, it may also be prudent to maintain a safe distance while filming to avoid obstructing officers or endangering yourself or your crew. Recording from a safe distance, if feasible, allows you to document the events while minimizing the likelihood of being perceived as a threat by law enforcement. By being aware of your rights and responsibilities when filming protests, you can better navigate potential interactions with law enforcement and avoid interruptions while filming public demonstrations. The fifth issue that filmmakers should consider is how to navigate copyright issues. It is crucial to be mindful of whether you are capturing any copyrighted materials during your filming, such as music, drawings, posters, photographs, or news broadcasts, without obtaining permission from the copyright owner, as unauthorized use of copyrighted material can potentially result in copyright infringement, which can have legal consequences. As a matter of background, copyright is enshrined in the Constitution and is designed to protect authors for the purpose of incentivizing the creation of works of art, among other things, which benefits society. The policy behind copyright is in fact not so different from the policy underlying freedom of speech protections under the First Amendment. Essentially, society benefits from additional speech and expression. Now, it's important for you, the filmmaker, to also understand the different works that are subject to copyright because you need to be aware of what works you've captured in your own work. This may not be obvious, but you can be guilty of copyright infringement even if you did not intend to infringe someone's work. For example, let's say you're filming in New York City and you decide that you are really interested in a particularly artful sign being held up at a protest. You may decide to film this sign for your documentary. That sign may be copyrightable, and capturing that sign in your film could constitute copyright infringement. Fortunately, there are defenses against claims of copyright infringement, which can allow you to use those copyrighted materials, such as the sign, in your film, and one of these defenses includes the concept of fair use. The most common defense to claims of copyright infringement is fair use, which allows for limited use of copyrighted material without the need for permission from the owner of the work under certain circumstances. Whether a particular use constitutes a fair use is determined by 4 factors. The Copyright Act provides a 4-factor balancing test that courts apply when determining whether a use is considered fair. These 4 factors are the purpose and character of the use, the nature of the copyrighted work, the amount and substantiality of the portion used, and the effect of the use upon the potential market for the copyrighted work. It is important to note that none of these factors are dispositive on their own, and courts will balance the factors to circumstances on a case-by-case basis. That said, there are some uses that are generally presumed to constitute fair use in most cases, but not necessarily all. Common examples of fair use include uses aimed at comment and criticism, news reporting, and scholarship and teaching, as well as research. Fortunately for documentary filmmakers, filming a documentary often falls under 2 of these presumptive categories: commentary and criticism in news reporting. Nonetheless, understanding what qualifies as fair use can be complex and may require additional legal expertise. For more information on fair use and other legal considerations regarding copyright, we encourage you to visit our website, where you can find resources and guidance on navigating these issues. The good news for filmmakers is that there is an effective way to mitigate many of the risks highlighted in this presentation, and those are appearance releases. As a general rule, you should always endeavor to obtain consent from those you film through appearance releases, especially if they are the focus of your footage. Even if you don't think an appearance release is necessary for your production, you may still want them for nullifying potential privacy claims, obtaining errors and omissions insurance, satisfying exhibition or distribution requirements, and just generally to avoid any misunderstandings down the road. Appearance releases take many forms and should be tailored to the type of production. Most appearance releases contain the following provisions: an authorization to record the participant and to use the recording and other materials about the participant in all media related to the project, a provision that the producer owns the recordings in which the participant appears and any contributions to the production made by the participant, a release of any and all legal claims in favor of the filmmaker, and a choice of law and venue provision for the filmmaker's preferred jurisdiction. Some appearance releases may go even further, but you should be cautious not to make these agreements too lengthy, as a participant will be more likely to sign a relatively brief and digestible agreement than a long and convoluted one. If a participant refuses to sign a written release, an on-camera verbal release is the next best option. That said, obtaining a written release is best practice for a couple of reasons. First, a written release tends to be more detailed and therefore more protective of the filmmaker than an on-camera verbal release. Second, a written release is more likely to conform to the requirement of insurers and distributors, if there are any. If you have to resort to a verbal release for an interview, a verbal release should cover at least the most basic elements of a written release. Those basic elements should include the purpose of the interview, where and how you expect the interview to be used, and that the completed work in which the interview appears may be shown in all media and by all means of transmission, worldwide and forever. The simplest procedure is for a production team member to read the release with sound and video rolling and ask the interview subject to acknowledge the terms on camera. For example, by saying, "Before we begin, let me reiterate that this interview will be used for blank." If you are simply filming B-roll or if obtaining appearance releases is not practical, you may be able to get away with an area release, which is sometimes referred to as a crowd release. If participants appear fleetingly or incidentally and are not featured on screen or shown engaging in any controversial behavior. Now, an area release is not a release at all. Rather, it is a written notice that filmmakers can post in an area where they intend to record. The notice tells people entering an area that they are being recorded for a particular purpose. However, it is important to note that posting an area release does not confer the same benefits of an appearance release signed by a participant. If you feel like you have any questions or concerns about any of these issues, please feel free to contact us, apply to be a client, or visit our website. The Filmmakers Legal Clinic is housed at Cardozo School of Law's Center for Visual Advocacy and sits at the intersection of film, law, and social justice. The Filmmakers Legal Clinic provides free transactional, intellectual property, and First Amendment legal services to independent filmmakers who work encourages and accelerates social change. Thank you.